Today I'm going to be talking about simplifying fractions. Many students get nervous around fractions, but what we're doing today is making them easier to work with. One important thing to remember is that fractions are really just a different way of writing division. The first and most important rule of simplifying is that any number divided by itself is just 1. So we have 7 over 7 here, and that equals 1. We have 14 over 14, that equals 1. And 500 over 500 is still 1. The only real exception is 0. Since you can't divide by 0, the fraction 0 over 0 is what's called undefined. So there's not a real solution there. Any other number, you can divide by itself and you'll get 1. Same thing goes with variables, and we'll do a couple examples of those in just a bit here. When simplifying fractions, you can cancel out any number or variable that you have multiplied in both the numerator and denominator. So for instance, we have 24 over 16. Well, we know that 24 will factor into 3 times 8, and we know that 16 will factor into 2 times 8. Well, if we have 8 in both the numerator and denominator, this is the same thing as 3 halves times by 8 over 8. Well, we just said that any number divided by itself is 1, so that 8 over 8 will go to a 1 right here, and the 3 over 2 will stay at 3 over 2. Well, we also know that any number times by 1 is what we just started with. So since 3 halves times by 1 is 3 halves, 24 over 16 will simplify to 3 halves. The short way of doing this is to simply say, well, 24 and 16 can both be divided by 8. So you divide the top by 8 and you get 3, and you divide the bottom by 8 and you get 2. And that gives us 24 over 16 equals 3 over 2. With variables, we follow the same rules. So if I have 3ab over 4a, I can simplify this the same way that I simplified the last problem. So I'm just going to take the a's off to the side here. So I have 3b times by a, and I have 4 times by a in the denominator. Well, I can write this as 2 fractions. I can write 3b over 4 times by a over a. We said that any variable over itself is 1, just like if we were working with numbers. And so 3b over 4 times by 1 is just 3b over 4. So if we simplify our original fraction, we end up with 3b over 4 as our final result. If we combine both simplification of numbers and variables, we are really just doing the same thing. We just need to be careful about our steps and then maybe split things apart to make it a little bit easier to work with. So I'm starting with 8xy over 12y. Well, I'm just going to take the numbers and move them into their own fractions. So I've got the 8 over 12 right here. I'm going to take the y's and move them to this fraction by themselves over here. And then this x, it's all by itself. So I'm going to move it to a fraction, and since there are no x's on bottom, it's just going to be x over 1. Well, we know that this 8 over 12 can be simplified because we can divide both 8 and 12 by 4. So 8 divided by 4 is 2, 12 divided by 4 is 3, so 8 over 12 simplifies to 2/3. The y over y, since it's a variable over itself, we know that we can simplify that just to 1. And so we do that. The x over 1 will not simplify because there's nothing that will divide both of those other than 1, and that doesn't really change anything. Once we've simplified each of our 3 fractions, we want to multiply them back together to get our final answer. So I have 2/3 times by x over 1 times by 1. Well, with this, I'm just going to multiply the numerators, so 2 times x gives me 2x, and 3 times 1 is 3. If I multiply everything by 1, it stays the same, so my final result, my final answer, is 2x over 3. And if I look back at the beginning, my final answer is obviously much simpler and going to be much easier to work with. And that's the whole point of simplifying fractions, is to make everything as easy to work with as possible. So this is why we're simplifying, and this is why simplifying is important, because it makes problems easier.